Today, Ian, we're going to talk about ending a tenancy under the new legislation, notice periods, rights, and what happens next. Welcome to the All Things Property podcast with me, Simon Bacon of Preferential Properties. Every week, Ian Sadler and I will delve into all things property. We'll guide you through with friendly, no-nonsense advice. I suppose for me, ending a tenancy used to feel quite straightforward. But with the changes that have come in, it's no longer as simple as just serving the notice. So, talk us through about how a tenant's now end a tenancy. What are the notice requirements?
Tenant would need to give 2 months' notice on the anniversary date of the rent payment.
Yeah.
Which gives them far more security of tenure and far more flexibility of tenure.
Yeah, but it's relatively simple, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
2 months' notice and away they go at any point. Landlord's routes to possession. What's that going to be now?
Routes to possession are sale of property or moving back into the property.
Well, they're the easy ones, aren't they? But effectively,
they've
got to use. It's a Section 8 notice, no longer Section 21. Section 8 notice. Lots of different grounds, lots of different reasons for being able to serve notice, but somewhat more complicated, I would have said.
Potentially more expensive as well.
More expensive, more complicated. I think what will be fundamental to all landlords is understanding the correct route. Any landlords who aren't sure what route to follow, we have got on a link to this particular website what all the various grounds are. So if you want some guidance or just want to know what the various grounds are, then do click the link following this podcast. So Ian, something that you picked up on was one of the ending tenancies that you talked about was landlords wanting to sell or move back in. How does that work in practice?
Well, they'd have to serve notice under Section 8 of the Housing Act, which gives the tenant 4 months' notice of their...
What's the difference then? What would a landlord have done previously under
the old...
Previously,
that is served Section 21, which would have given the tenants a specific 2 months' notice, and they could serve that at any time after any relevant time during the tenancy or after the tenancy. It's not that simple now. There are various restrictions that make it less of an option for a landlord to do that.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? I know we're in the new legislation now, and we've got to see how that works. What do you think the implications could be? Because if I was a landlord thinking of, selling my property, and landlords do that, don't they? They do think, oh, do you know what? My circumstances have changed, or something's happened. Maybe it's time for us to sell our property. So let's, much as I don't like to do it, let's serve the tenant a notice. Only takes, in the old system, you've got a couple of months and then we pop it on the market. That's changed, hasn't it?
You have to be really certain about your plans. Then you can't sit on the fence and say, well, if it doesn't sell, I'll re-let it, because the rules and regs have changed with that from a timescale perspective. So,
do you think that's good?
This whole act is aimed at the renters' reform, isn't it? It's making it more secure, offering more security of tenure for tenants, and that, in as much as it makes landlords less keen, less
able to, on a whim make a decision. That's what the legislation was there to do, wasn't it? Wasn't it to give tenants a little bit of security that if a landlord wants to sell, they can still sell it.
It has to be committed to.
But it has to be planned. They have to know that's what they want to do. There was all this. For me, there was loads of this negativity and stuff that landlords just want to get rid of tenants because they fancy a change. That's what Section 21 abolished. But really, all this is doing is saying to a landlord, there are so many grounds. You can still sell your property. You can still serve notice on a tenant to vacate because you want to sell a property. But what you've got to do is you've got to plan for it. The notice period is now 4 months. So that means that there's no point a landlord thinking in January, oh, do you know what? I think I'm going to sell my property, get it ready for the Easter market, which is traditionally what some people will do. They've got to have thought about it the back end of the year before in order to market it for the Easter market. And what they're not going to be able to do is to go, oh, I put it on the market, I've tried it for 2 or 3 months and hasn't sold, so I'll give Simon a call and say to him, well, can you put it back on the rental market for me, please?
Which could be perceived as a tactic of increasing the rent, which people used to be able to do, but they can't do that now.
So ending a tenancy now has to be, for those kind of grounds, has to be thought through. You have to think, I'm planning for my exit from this particular property or properties. If you rush, you're going to get it wrong. So, for me, the Section 8 notice for selling is a positive. How many times have you served a Section 21 notice, a valid Section 21 notice, because a landlord has wanted to sell, and what has the tenant said to you? Have I only got 2 months?
Well, that's where the flexibility aspect comes in, isn't it? It's I think landlords need to be aware if they're selling that properties will take time to sell, and it may be a case of, well, what's to stop the landlord extending a tenancy past the 4 months if it suits both parties? I'm presuming there's an option to do that. And
there is, but communication, isn't it? If a landlord wants to sell, does he want to sell with a tenant in or a tenant out? Surely there's got to be a point where you give the tenant 4 months. So why would you want the tenant to stay in longer than 4 months if you're trying to sell it? That's that, going down the old route of...
Well, it is, but it might suit their financial circumstances. If they're committed to selling and the income's not that important to them, they can manage without it, then the logical route to follow would be enforce the 4 months and get a tenant out and sell it in with vacant possession.
But isn't that the way that we should be going?
Yeah,
because if you leave a tenant in and then you suddenly find a buyer, and the tenant's then under pressure, if they haven't found anyone, you've said to the tenant, oh, you can stay in until the landlord has sold it.
No, you can't do that. But conversely, you could say to the tenant, if you find somewhere within the first 1 or 2 months or 3 months, it suits both parties, then, doesn't it?
Well,
but you give them the option, so you're giving, not just taking.
But that hasn't changed, has it? Because you still, even under the old regime, if a tenant said, you've given me 2 months, I'm giving you a month, now it's 4 months, the tenant can still just give you 2 months. So you've got to be... The whole reason for Section 8 for selling and the longer notice period, I think, is absolutely justified in terms of, I've done it where tenants, I've given them 2 months notice, and a tenant has said, 2 months, I've only got 2 months to find a new property, and all the hassle and implications of going with that. So, I would have said 4 months for selling gives everybody a bit of breathing space and the opportunity to go, right, I'm going to find, I've got 4 months to find somewhere. That's a lengthy period of time,
but if the tenant does find somewhere within 2 months,
so the tenant has the flexibility to go,
notice,
I found somewhere, I'm not I'm not going to lose out because I've got I can't give my notice. The tenant can still give their notice. So for me, it's a better system.
Ultimately, it'll be a better, a fairer system.
Yeah, and also if you also think about it, a lot of the Section 8 grounds, so persistent late payment of rent, you're talking about you only need to give the tenant 2 weeks' notice, and then you can apply to the courts. Isn't that advantageous? It means that you can, as a landlord, as a letting agent, you can act quicker. You don't have to keep on waiting. So for persistent late payment, you don't have to be in arrears. It can just be that, the landlord is fed up because the tenant is persistently messing around with paying their rent.
Yeah, but that ground on its own is weak.
Yeah, it is, very. So, I think what we will show through this whole podcast is information, communication, record keeping. You know, you have got to have stuff really buttoned down, which is why any landlord has to be very cautious and make sure that the properties are being managed, that they're keeping good records, and that they have got a history that supports what they want to do. So what tends to happen, you know, in your experience, what happens after a notice is served? You don't often get, you know, you serve a notice, it's not often that, you know, anything really happens, is it? Straight away, the tenant takes a bit of time to think about it. Landlord...
It ends in compromise by the landlord, doesn't it? Because you cannot complete the sale of a property in 2 months, but a tenant can find a property within that 2 months, or well, it's irrelevant what used to happen, because it can't happen now, can it? But the flexibility for a landlord, from a landlord's perspective, is not as good as it used to be.
No, and I think for me, you know, the only fly in the ointment that I can see, which is no different to what used to happen, was court timelines.
Mm-hmm. Which is why landlords are going to be reluctant to push that button, aren't they? Court proceedings are expensive, 4 figures minimum. Time, courts are backlog of possession cases, 12 months now, best case scenario perhaps.
Letting agents, do you think they will be comfortable, you know, with the volume of Section 8 notices and the various grounds and the amount of record keeping? Do you think, you know, letting agents will be comfortable doing all of this? Or
no, I don't think so. I think it puts their public liability insurance, their professional indemnity insurance under threat.
And I think that's something that, you know, for a lot of landlords, that may be an indication that, you know, letting agents will start to be saying to them, well, you know, yes, we will be producing all of the documentation, we've got all the timelines, we've got the evidence, but actually you're going to need, you know, a solicitor or, you know, someone else to actually be serving the notice to ensure that the compliance and the notices are valid, etc. And I think, you know, for me, that's one of those where, you know, that may come as a surprise to some landlords, won't it?
I think the grounds of possession, there are too many discretionary grounds. I think the sale one is the firmest one, if you've got all the paperwork in place.
Yeah.
Moving back into it or a member of the family is unlikely, but that does happen. That's the second most secure possession process. I think the rest are a bit up in the air, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Which means that, you know, I don't know, what's your view? Because my understanding, you know, I've attended court on behalf of landlords on simple Section 21 notices before. Landlords have had to attend as well. You know, the days of, you know, courts allowing letting agents to just, you know, sit in or to lead the proceedings seem to be probably...
No, judges don't like that, do they? They want to deal with professionals.
Yeah. Are you saying we're not professional?
Not in law, no.
No.
The legal profession's a different breed.
Yeah. So, you know, I think there will be costs associated with it, and I think that, you know, potentially a letting agent's role will be much more of a provider of information rather than, you know, the doer. I think, you know, you may find that we serve the Section 8 notices, but, you know, I think even we will need to have guidance from the legal profession around that. Any ideas, you know, some of the mistakes, have you ever come across any mistakes that invalidate notices?
Ultimately, with no nasty consequences is the word I'm looking for. I'm struggling with my vocabulary today.
Oh well, never mind. Any ideas? Do you want to give us a flavour of something?
Well, not serving the relevant documentation as far as the tenancy. We've been through that, gas, electricity, EPCs, tenancy deposits. A checklist of about 5 or 6 things that you need to send. Easy to establish if that's not been sent to the tenant. So you can't just say, I handed it to them on the day of the tenancy. You need attached to your emails as a minimum, just proof of serving.
Yeah, I mean, something that we do, I don't know whether you do.
I'm going to
or
be
not.
doing it shortly.
Are you?
Yes.
Okay. You tend to. I think sometimes think the podcasts are more for you than for anybody else.
I
here.
learned so much,
Yes,
guys.
I
Listen to
thought
this
you
man.
might.
He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. So what we do is all of the documentation that you have to have evidence that you've provided to a tenant at the check-in at the tenancy, we actually list it all out and get them to go through and sign that document. So although we have all the documentation and email evidence if we need it, we actually have a very simple form that the tenant signs that says I have received, and we list out all the documents that they have received, so that again, if you're serving a notice, you can go, here you are, there's one bit of paper the tenant has signed. They can't say they didn't get something because they have signed on the day they moved in to say yes, they received all of the relevant information.
That's a good piece of admin, and I will be using that in the future.
And any landlords, again, that would like to see a copy of that, there will be a link to that form at the end of this podcast. So, let's talk about communication. It's something we talk about loads. So, during the notice period, or during any period where you've served a notice or a tenant is under notice, what's the important thing with communication? How does that help?
Apart from the obvious.
Well, what's the obvious then?
Well, keeping people appraised of the situation and timelines and so on.
Yeah. Avoids conflict, doesn't it?
Yeah.
By communicating, and that's again one of the messages I want to send out to everybody. Good communication, active, regular communication with your tenants is critical to ensuring that some of these processes, like ending tenancies and giving notices, can run as smoothly as possible. What about tenants' rights during the notice periods? Any changes to those? Does a tenant, if you're under notice, does the tenant still have the same rights, or do they lose certain rights, tenancy rights, or what?
I don't think they lose any rights, do they?
No.
Oh, good.
All the protections remain in place.
Yeah.
Their tenancy remains in force, the obligations remain in force, and their protection remains in force during that whole notice period. Okay, so let's wrap this particular session up, Ian. And I think the upshot of this one, the message I'd like to send out, I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that ending a tenancy requires planning. If you rush it, you can get it wrong, and if you do that, it can cost you time and money. So if you are interested or considering bringing a tenancy to an end under the new regime, then please do give us a call and let us give you some help and assistance. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the All Things Property podcast. If you found this episode useful, don't forget to subscribe, like and share. These things really help us reach the people who need to hear this advice. See you next week.